what's wrong with these people? Like, why is, like, every single one of my employees or most of my employees lets me down? Like, why don't they just get this? Why don't they manage themselves? Why don't they fill in the blank? Because the reality of it is there's not a single founder I've ever met, and I've worked with a lot of them, who started their business or nonprofit with a vision of managing 5 people. When I started thinking not in terms of what did they do, but when did they do it, it started to come into place. It started to click. And I started to see this pattern emerge. And I realized that of all those 20,000 stories, there's really just one story. There's one main pattern. And the degree to which we follow that pattern, our life is a lot easier. But the degree to which we resist it or push against it or just simply don't understand it, which is the case most of the time, our lives as founders gets harder and harder and harder. And so I was able to map out the different stages of this journey. There's 7 of them, and put them together in the book called The Founder's Evolution.
Hi, I'm Zarina, and welcome to the Grow and Learn podcast. Beyond these conversations, I actively connect investors with high growth opportunities. Right now, I'm working on projects seeking strategic partners, like a $346 million real estate development, a revolutionary heating technology, and an AI-driven life insurance disruptor. If you're an investor, PE firm, or family office looking for scalable ventures, let's talk. Book a call at GrowNLearn.org to explore these opportunities. Speaking to Scott Ritzheimer today, welcome everyone who's an entrepreneur looking to grow their business. My guest today has helped more than 20,000 companies scale with a predictable step-by-step process that he designed. I'm very curious to hear about the process because it's unfollowable as far as I understood. Welcome, Scott.
Zarina, thanks for having me on the show. Excited to be here. I always get this like moment of nervous anticipation when I jump on and we hit record because it was actually a podcast that totally changed the trajectory of my life and led me to doing what I do now today, day in and day out. And so I hope that for someone listening, it's that type of an opportunity. And I would encourage anyone who's listening. I mean, your show's fantastic. All the episodes, listen in this way, but listen because it could be that for you.
Oh, fantastic. So it's a podcast episode that you heard or that you participated in?
I heard, yeah. It was back in 2017, and my business was stuck. I was frustrated. I remember, folks will relate to this because it happens. It's actually a stage that we all go through. But I would have quit if I didn't own the business, right? It's like I wouldn't have shown up if it wasn't my name that was on everything. And the big question that I found myself asking over and over and over again every day, every morning when I woke up is this it? Like, is this really what being a business owner is? Because we had fought so hard, started the company back in 07, 08, depending on which time frame you want to use. That's a complex story. But it had been going for about 10 years. And we'd grown to, at that time, around $6-7 million. And like, that sounds great. I'm in my mid-20s. Like, that's not a bad deal. And I'm not complaining about any of those things. But what I found, and what just about anyone who goes through this process will find, is that businesses get bigger, but they don't inherently get better, right? I kept thinking that if we reached a certain dollar amount in revenue or profit or a certain headcount, or if I could build a certain team, that it would be okay. Like that this would all be worth it. And what I found was just the bigger we got, the more problems there were, the more I was running around frantically, and the more frustrated I was becoming. And so that had culminated in a few years of our profitability declining, and there were a lot of things that weren't working well. Again, from the outside, it looks like a success. We were at that point, top 700 in fastest growing companies in the US. Like, it was going really, really well from the outside, but I was dying inside.
What line of business did you operate in at this time?
So we helped businesses and nonprofits get started. So we were out there launching them. We were doing a lot of the background paperwork that had to be done. We were helping them structure it initially. And we were doing it at scale. That's why I had the opportunity to help, like you mentioned in the bio, somewhere around 20,000 different organizations, both for-profit and nonprofit to start. Many of those were in those years with that company.
Mm-hmm. All right. So you used the knowledge that you gathered from your initial company to Startup Scale Architects, which is the company that you're involved in right now. How did it evolve? What was you kind of told us
Yeah,
the
yeah,
story
yeah.
of
So
evolution, but the
sorry,
moment
I
was,
did.
yeah.
I realized I didn't even answer your first question. So what this podcast was, as a gentleman who's now a dear friend of mine, his name's Les McEwen, but he introduced me to this idea that it's not so much about what you do. Right, from a strategy perspective, that's an important question, but the more important question is when you should do it. And what was happening for me, and what I realized is, and this is to answer your second question, is I looked out over this, 20,000 different founders. I saw a lot of them fail, right? I saw many of them succeed, don't get me wrong, but I saw a lot of them fail, and a lot of them I didn't expect to fail, right? They started off really, really strong, and somewhere along the way, it just didn't work. And when I started thinking, not in terms of what did they do, but when did they do it? It started to come into place. It started to click. And I started to see this pattern emerge. And I realized that of all those 20,000 stories, there's really just one story. There's one main pattern. And the degree to which we follow that pattern, our life is a lot easier. But the degree to which we resist it or push against it or just simply don't understand it, which is the case most of the time, our lives as founders gets harder and harder and harder. And so I was able to map out the different stages of this journey. There's 7 of them, and put them together in the book called The Founder's Evolution.
Fantastic. So I know people usually like to mention their resources at the end, but I'd encourage you to direct the audience right now to getting the copy, because I know you're providing a free copy of the book.
Yeah, absolutely. We've actually made it free, like you mentioned, to everyone who wants a digital copy. You can get it at scalearchitects.com/founders and download it right there. You can get the whole thing.
Mm-hmm. Would you be willing to share some of the steps, at least, to this journey and how we can identify and or get oriented in this map of entrepreneurial growth, of where we are and what we need to do next?
Of course, would be delighted. So what's interesting about the story is it actually starts before the story starts, right? Every great hero has a backstory. And when you look at the founders, particularly those who are successful, you start to see traits emerge of what they did before they launched, or at a minimum, what was true of them before they launched. And what you'll find when you really rewind the tape and look back at the history of a successful founder, virtually every single one of them had this period of dissatisfaction and discontent. Either, for most of us as an employee working for someone else, for some folks it happens even earlier on, it's just another kid in school or wherever it might be, but there's this frustration that starts to brew in the heart of a founder. And everyone has frustrating years and seasons and times, bad days at work. That's not what I'm talking about, because for founders, even when days are good, right? Even when they get the big bonus because they're performing like crazy, even when they make the big deal, there's this quiet discontent that's always there for them. And it really centers on the question, isn't there a better way? Right? Like, isn't there a better way to serve our customers, to treat our employees, to explore this new market? There's this passion that starts to build on finding a better way. And that passion is the seed for a great business or nonprofit. That's really where it all starts. And that first stage is called the dissatisfied employee, right? And we actually want to use that dissatisfaction, use it intentionally, because it'll set us up, especially if we do it well, it'll set us up for success in stage number 2.
I've spoken to quite a few coaches and consultants for startups, entrepreneurs, and I've never heard people frame it in this way. I really enjoy the way you put it as it is, because I can also recognize myself when you're speaking about this initial drive, initial spark to understand. Yeah.
Well, and what's so important is how we use it. And this is something that unfortunately is kind of a tragedy of the way we like to shape our stories when we're successful. And so you very rarely hear about this happen, but it actually happens almost all the time in successful stories. And that is, during that period of dissatisfaction, what we want to do is just jump in and solve it, right? I don't want to be dissatisfied anymore. I want to start my own business, get rid of the boss, the whole 9 yards, right? But the reality of it is, when you look at those who create, especially those who create a significant amount of success later, a common trait is that they use that period of dissatisfaction not to start quickly, but to learn quickly. And so you'll get folks like, I've heard Gary Vaynerchuk talk about it. I've heard Mr. Beast talk about it. They use this dissatisfaction not to just go and jump in and say, hey, I know everything I need to know. I'm going to go start my own business. They take the time to go out and research and learn and even volunteer at other places to get to understand the game better. And for anyone who's listening, who's in that dissatisfied period, I appreciate how hard that is. But the thing that you can do to make the most of it is not go start your business really quickly. It's to learn as much as you can before you make the leap. Because the really cool part about it, Zarina, is that when you're learning in this stage, you're doing it on someone else's dime, right? Someone else is covering your payroll, and it might not be everything that you want to make, but it sure is nice having that check when you're out exploring and learning. And so, yeah, again, for anyone listening, if you're in that dissatisfied employee stage, take the opportunity to learn, get close to the game, figure out what it is you really want to do.
Fantastic. So this is all stage one.
All stage one. Yeah, it's all stage one. And so how does stage one end? Like what's next? Well, what happens is that dissatisfaction builds and it builds and it builds. It reaches a boiling and it's just like, you've had enough, right? It's usually not quite by design. It's usually a bad conversation with a boss, some poor interaction with a coworker, something goes and it's just, I'm done. I'm going and doing. For some folks, they get laid off, right? It's an unfortunate part of many people's stories, and they have to make the leap. But either way, through whatever means, what separates stage one from stage two is that you go full time. And it's like, I've got to make a living on this now. And once you do that, everyone knows who's on Instagram that being an entrepreneur is, working 4 hours a week and then go sitting on the beach and sipping 2 pina coladas singing Garth Brooks songs, right? Like that's how it works. Not at all. Not at all. And so this second stage, I call it the startup entrepreneur. Nothing magical about the name, but you're in startup mode, right? You are an entrepreneur. And the fascinating thing is the root of the word entrepreneur actually means one who goes between. And that's ask anyone who's in this stage or been in this stage, and that's very true, right? We're going in between what was and what can be, who we were and who we're becoming. And it's this intensely emotional, exciting, challenging time for every one of us who goes through the stage. You'll experience more setback over the first 2 years of being an entrepreneur than most people would in 2 lifetimes, right? It's a huge uphill battle for most people, not always, but most people, but it's worth it. Right? It's just glorious because it's yours. You're doing it. You're able to pursue that better way. And you get these small wins and they start to accumulate, and it's awesome. Unfortunately, there are many, many, many days during this period where we kind of wake up thinking like, what have I done? Like, what was I thinking? Why did I do this? Because it's a lot harder, it's a lot more expensive, and it takes a lot longer than most of us think, but it's also more rewarding, and that's what makes it all worth it.
Yes, I can recognize the road so far. So indeed, that's the way it is. But I think most people by this time have been forewarned many times that it's not as easy as it seems, and it's not all drinking pina coladas. So most people I talk to are, well aware that it will take a lot, and it's a huge undertaking. Yeah, and I hope that's true. It depends on the pocket, right? And the promise that's given. There are a lot of people who make really ridiculous promises to entrepreneurs, and I think that's a shame. But again, I think podcasts like this, where you're able to share, hey, this is the reality of what that looks like. It's not all bad by any means. It's not all good either, right? It's very hard and very rewarding. It's a lot of both. And so what happens in this stage is it's just
reps, right? It's just time. You're learning and doing in real time. It's go, go, go. It's largely reliant on you, your skill set. You got to learn to close. You got to learn to market. You got to learn to close deals. You got to learn to provide whatever that is. And those who are successful figure that out, right? They start to crack the code. And it's little by little, but Les, a gentleman I mentioned earlier, described something that most of us don't feel it this way, but it's pretty funny. He's like, you wake up and you have an employee one day. You know, it's like you grow and you need other people, and so basically what we do, we need help. We need folks who can help us get stuff done, and so we hire by pulse and proximity. Right? Anyone who's near us and breathing, like that's kind of the litmus test.
That's hilarious, yeah.
Yeah, and there's nothing inherently wrong with that. It just doesn't work particularly well most of the time, right? You have to get really lucky for it to work. But I think it's kind of a necessary part of the process for most folks. And so what happens, though, is our pulse proximity hiring process gets people in the company, like it gets butts in seats. It gets folks there helping out. But what we start to find out is those folks don't think like us. They don't act like us. They don't take ownership like us. They don't solve problems like we do. They're not creative like us. They're not as driven as we are. And what happens for founders who graduate from that startup entrepreneur phase and find themselves in stage 3 is they wake up, it's usually on a Monday morning, after working all weekend to not only do your job, but clean up everybody else's job. And we think, what's wrong with these people? Like, why is, like, every single one of my employees or most of my employees lets me down? Like, why don't they just get this? Why don't they manage themselves? Why don't they fill in the blank? Because the reality of it is there's not a single founder I've ever met, and I've worked with a lot of them, who started their business or nonprofit with a vision of managing 5 people. Right? That's just not the goal. That's nowhere near the goal. Like many of them left corporate to not have to manage a bunch of employees. And now they find themselves spending a huge portion of their time each and every week managing a small team. And it builds this resentment because it's not what they want to do. To some extent, they don't think it's what they should have to do. And to a significant extent, they feel the pressure of having to sell 4 times as much to feed all of those people. And so we find ourselves, if we're not careful, graduating from this startup entrepreneur stage into stage 3, which I call the reluctant manager. And we're just kind of frustrated. A company's super successful. We smile to anyone who asks how it's going, right? We're making more money, at least from a revenue perspective, than we ever had. Like, we're getting bigger deals. There's so much that's so cool about the stage. But there's this frustration that builds and builds and builds and builds. And most folks at this stage, if they haven't really learned how the game is changing or no one's told them, they just feel totally underwater, right? Like, it's just like the water level's been rising and rising and rising, and it's so far above them, they can't even see the sun anymore, is what it feels like. They're just buried in their own work. They can't actually get to their own work because they're buried in keeping everybody else up on their work, and it's really, really frustrating. And so what we have to do at this stage is recognize that managing a group of people, if you want to grow to the size that needs more than just you and 1 or 2 people, is here to stay. Like, it's a skill. It's not a personality type, it's a skill, and it can be learned. And if you can learn some basic management skills, and if you can bring in a couple people to help fill in some gaps on management as well, just 1 or 2 trusty right-hand men or women, you'll create just this inordinate amount of growth. What's really, really cool about stage 3, even though it's frustrating, is if we can understand why it's frustrating and the very, very simple things that we need to do to overcome that frustration, you'll see most of my clients in the first year will double or triple their revenue in 1 year, just by understanding how to succeed in that stage and how it's different than what it was when it was just them.
Mm. How do these founders bridge the gap between the revenue that they're currently making and what is required to maintain these hires?
That's a great question. It's one of the biggest things that you have to focus on. And so this is why learning the basic management skills is so important, because you can't blow all your time managing other folks, because the biggest job that you have to do personally is make sure that everything other than the biggest job you have to do personally is off of your plate, right? And there's a balance to that. But the reality of it is most of us can succeed in stage 2 with kind of the roller coaster. It's not all that fun, but it's like we have a couple big revenue months and we're great for a little while. We go and focus on fulfilling all of that. And then it's like, oh shoot, I got to scramble and sell more. You can survive. You can actually just embrace that and live that way. And a lot of folks do, who stay in that startup entrepreneur mode. There's seasons of bringing in revenue, and there's seasons of fulfilling that revenue. It's fine. That's really, really tough to do with a team around you. You've got to find a way of bringing in more consistent revenue. And that generally means spending more time on sales and marketing than you're used to. Because it's not just about waiting for sales to come in. It's not just about who you know. It's about going out there and starting to some extent scale your revenue producing activities. And for most of us, that doesn't come automatically, right? Like even if you're really good at selling, sometimes marketing is just really hard. Sometimes it takes some time to figure it out. Maybe you're really good at marketing and it just takes some time to figure the sales side out. Maybe you're really good at coaching or consulting and you got to figure out both the selling and the marketing. In any case, you have to make sure that you're giving a huge amount of your time and attention to solving that problem. Which means that you have to learn to manage the rest of your team well in just about everything else. And it sounds like you have to do everything. And to a certain extent, it's one of the challenges of this stage is that you do have to manage and do at the same time. It's like being the captain of a sports team, right? You're on the field playing, but trying to direct the affairs of the rest of the team at the same time. It is a challenge, but it's not insurmountable. And the way that you do it is by learning simple skills of management and then focusing as much as you can on revenue producing activities.
Mm-hmm. Well, lately, and not only lately, like it's been a trend that there are a lot of freelance companies that, and also fractional support service, be it in marketing or in operations or in whatever. So you can basically hire a remote team and not necessarily hire them full time. So would you say that the management skills that are required are absolutely the same for these types of teams as they are for a full-time hire?
They're not exactly the same, but they're very similar. So what I would say is when I'm talking about, the line, it's usually around the equivalent of 5 to 10 full-time employees. So that might be 10 to 20, part-time employees. It usually can't get that high. But whether they're external or not, you still have to learn to manage them, right? Because even if they're fantastic, if you can manage them well, you'll get an even bigger return out of it. So it doesn't eliminate the need to manage well. It just enhances the value of managing well. Mm-hmm. And so when folks will hit it, there's a couple of different variables. One is just your own personal capacity for management, right? Some have greater management skills than others by virtue of their history or their wiring or all kinds of reasons. Coaching. The other thing that'll happen is the degree to which the rest of your team needs to be managed. And so one of the things that using fractional folks does, it's not a guarantee, but if you look at the average person you'd go and hire yourself versus the average fractional person you could bring in, they'll cost a little bit more per hour, but you will have to manage them less. So it's not a bad idea, particularly for folks who want to stay in stage 2 and get as big as possible without going into the reluctant manager stage. Using fractional and external help is a great way of getting bigger in stage 2 without kind of overdoing that limit.
Yeah, fantastic. Great.
The reality of it is, though, that even with external contractors, I was talking with a gentleman who's actually in the nonprofit space, and he had 12 external contractors who could probably do the work of about 3 internal folks for a couple of different reasons. And so just using contractors alone isn't enough to keep stage 3 at bay forever, right? If you get enough contractors, you're still going to run into a similar challenge. You're still going to have to evolve to the next stage of your development as a founder.
Quick break. If you're looking for high growth opportunities or expert strategy support, let's talk. I'm involved in projects like a next-gen biofertilizer transforming agriculture, an aerial mapping drone that's 10 times faster than traditional tech, and AI-driven innovations disrupting industries. As a fractional chief strategy officer, I help businesses execute strategies and bring in top experts to get things done. Let's discuss your needs. Book a call at GrowNLearn.org. The name of your company is Scale Architects. Is your belief that all companies by all means need to scale and that's the road to, or as you mentioned, they might as well stay in stage 2 and keep in their ebb and flow of income as an individual entrepreneur?
Yeah. I love that you picked up on that because this is one of the real big things that you need to figure out in stage 3 is, do you need to scale? And so I don't think that anyone has to scale or that scaling is better than not scaling. In fact, if you don't need to scale and you do scale, that's way worse than not scaling. So the way I define it for folks, because we mentioned this at the beginning of the show, businesses get bigger, they don't get better. So scaling in and of itself is not good or bad. It's not helpful or not helpful. What you have to decide when you start bumping into challenges like stage 3 is, how big does this company need to be for it to fulfill the vision that I have for it? So for me, I've actually, it might sound similar to what you're doing, I'm not sure, but I have intentionally chosen to not scale out of stage 2 for this business. I've done it before. I know how to do it. I teach other people how to do it, but it's not necessary for this business. I can create the impact that I want through my books, through training courses, through our licensing program, and through one-on-one interactions to do everything that I need it to do, at least right now. So I'm not in any rush to get to stage 3. I don't have to hire a whole bunch of employees. And so I've chosen a strategy that keeps me in stage 2. That's perfectly okay. And for most folks, it'd be helpful to hear that if you optimize stage 2, you'll make more profit than most people will in stage 3. Mm-hmm. So, Zarina, we get this thing, at least I do as coaches, folks always want to say, how do I get to the next level? But that presumes that you should get to the next level, right? And so my question is why do you need to get to the next level? And the only answer for that is because my vision demands it.
All right. Well, let's talk about the ones whose vision demands it. What's stage 4?
All right. So stage 3, we learn some basic management, and then we start to fill in the gaps with our trusty right-hand man or woman, right? You bring some people in to help you lead. And again, that creates this enormous amount of growth. And there's this season where you've kind of figured out stage 3. You're not totally reluctant anymore. You've got the skills you need as a manager, and you're able to run those plays for a while, right? There's not a fixed timeline, but a lot of folks can do that 3, 4, 5 years and create a ton of growth during that season. For us, we were doing double-digit growth every single year, from 35 to 75% year over year when we were in this stage, for me as a founder. And what happens is, slowly but surely as founder, you become responsible for less and less inside the company directly, right? I remember for me, one of the ones that I loved getting rid of was our nighttime sales queue, right? So if folks called in the evening, we'd have to interrupt dinner, or there was one time me and my co-founder were both taking calls during Thanksgiving dinner because we were just trying to get the thing off the ground. And so anyone who called and wanted to buy something, whenever they called and wanted to buy it, we would do. Well, we got to the size where we didn't need to be open on Thanksgiving, but then we also got to the size where we could hire someone else to come in and fill the evening hours from 5 to 9 p.m. every day, and I didn't have to be on call anymore. It was wonderful. So there's some things like that are an absolute thrill. There are other things that can be a little bit frustrating because if they go wrong, you can't just jump in and fix it. And so what happens is we find ourselves more and more moving away from that captain on the field, being part of the game, being the one to close deals or win the customer or fill in the blank, whatever it is that you do inside your business. And you spend more and more time coaching other people who do. And then the scale flips to where you actually spend the majority of your time leading other leaders, coaching other people to get stuff done, even manage other folks. And it creates this really, really weird feeling for founders And that is for most of them because they're type A, they get stuff done. They love to be in control. They want to drive faster than most other people can go. There's this gap that starts to form between what you're capable of doing, right? Because you've got to do it through others, and what your vision is and what you want to see happen. And so even though the company is getting bigger and bigger, even though you're growing and to some extent faster and faster, the gap between what you can see you can become and what your team is capable of starts to get bigger and bigger. And it causes this feeling of just being out of control, especially because as you're growing and the complexity goes up, it gets harder and harder for your team to run the company. You can't use the same strategies you did before. And so the gap between our vision and our reality gets bigger, and then our reality gets more challenging because the problems start to pop up. One of the things you'll find in stage 4 is that your problems scale faster than your profits. All the time. And so you end up in a position like I was. You end up with profitability declining. You're having to do more work for less money. Top line revenue is still going up, which has you scratching your head like, where's the rest of the money going? Like, what's happening? You put a plan in place to fix it. It doesn't get fixed. You have leaders that aren't keeping up. Many of them are your friends with blood and sweat equity, from all the years that you've worked together. And it just, this whole swarm of really challenging, really uncomfortable situations that make us question, is this it? Like, is this really what I signed up for? And something that I'll liken it to, you appreciate this, is a kind of funny story. My wife and I have 3 kids, and they are, the 2 oldest are 2 years apart, and then the youngest is another 8 years behind them. So there's a big age gap for our kids. And when our youngest was newborn, 1-year-old, somewhere in that ballpark, we just did not get out for a whole lot of date nights because getting someone who can deal with a 1-year-old, an 8-year-old, and a 10-year-old was not an easy thing to do. And we just kind of had enough, and we're like, we're going to do it. We had a family friend come, and she was going to watch all kids. She knew all of them, had relationships with them. It was going to be okay. She knew she was in for a challenge. Anyway, in the height of American romance, we went and we went and had dinner at a chain restaurant, and then watched a movie. And that movie was the Top Gun Maverick movie with Tom Cruise in it. And it was really cool. I had a great time at dinner, really enjoyed the movie. And it was all like the nostalgia of it and the old music and like the scene. It was cool. But if you kind of watch the movie like I did, the first hour and a half of the movie is a little depressing. Like, Tom wrecks his plane a couple of times. Once he's shot down. He doesn't have the girl. He's in emotional conflict with the son of his dead wingman, whose career he feels like he torpedoed. His bosses all hate him. The world is leaving him behind. Like, everything that can go wrong in Tom's life goes wrong. And so I'm sitting there kind of waiting for the happy ending. Tom's behind enemy lines, getting shot at by a helicopter, and we get a phone call from the babysitter saying, "Hey, you need to come home." And I was like, "Oh my gosh, what's wrong?" And fortunately, everyone was healthy and safe, but the little one wasn't sleeping, and the boys were fighting downstairs. It was chaos. So we come home to chaos, and just all hands on deck, figure it out, sort it out, get everyone in bed. And I'm laying in bed like, what happened to Tom? And it took 2 years. It took me 2 years to see the end of the movie. And so there's 2 years of just like mild depression, of Tom's situation. And folks that are in stage 4, it's like that, right? It's heroic, and we've got the history like Tom Cruise, and it's depressing because we're in the valley, the belly of this journey and this hard season, wondering if this is it. And what happens in stage 4, we become disillusioned leaders. And we just wonder if any of this is worth it. And the real tragedy is because we don't know that this is a normal stage that everyone goes through. And because everyone who tells their story doesn't tell it in this stage, right? They tell it with the big heroic ending. We think that the heroic journey is all up and to the right. It's just going to get greater and greater and greater. And what we don't realize is there's a very difficult season in the middle. And that that difficult season is necessary. It changes things in us. It forms things in us. It makes us capable of becoming the leaders that we need to be in stage 5. So it's a necessary part. We don't have to get stuck there. It doesn't have to last forever. It doesn't have to be massively painful for an indefinite period of time, but it feels like it is, right? We look at the trajectory of like, hey, startup entrepreneur, those were good days. Reluctant manager, it was, wasn't as great. It didn't feel as free, but we got a lot done. Now it doesn't feel free at all, and I don't know that we can get anything done. Like, what is going on? And we kind of map that out and think the next stage is just going to be worse, and it's not. We're actually just one stage away. The next stage is the most remarkable transformation, the biggest liberating transformation from one stage to another, is where we can go from that stage 4 disillusioned leader to becoming what has been on our business card since day 1, but we've not actually stepped into the role, and that is stage 5 chief executive. And
before we dive into the chief executive, Scott, allow me one question. There's this theory that the founders are either built and have the necessary skills to start up a company, to grow it, or to run it.
Yeah.
Have you seen this in your research? Have you seen that at some point of all of these stages, they decide to step away and maybe hire an external to manage the company? At what stage is this replacement of the founder taking place?
Yeah, that's another great question, and it's 100% spot on from an intuition standpoint. It usually happens in stage 4 because of all the frustrations that I just explained. That's where not only do we externalize that and say, hey, something's wrong with my company, it needs to change, or my team and something needs to change, we start to wonder, do I have what it takes? Like, can I lead this? And I think that this whole idea that founders are built for a certain stage is, I understand it because there's correlations, but I think it's done a massive disservice to founders who've sold themselves short because they buy the lie that they can't get to the next stage. Mm-hmm. It's just not true. I am yet to meet a founder who understood stage 4 and stage 5 and said, I want to evolve to be stage 5, that wasn't able to do it. One of the things, this is why I love working with founders, is because once they understand what they need to do, they are the most resourceful, adaptable, intelligent in like a raw, not intellectual way, but just that natural intelligence. They can do it. Again, I've never seen a founder in stage 4 who couldn't go to stage 5 if they wanted to, right? And understood it. So I think instead of having this conversation around, are you wired to do it or not? The conversation should be, do you want to do it or not? And there's a lot of people who don't, right? There's a lot of people who, just like they don't need to get to stage 3, never even need to get to stage 4. And interestingly, what will happen when I have this conversation with folks in stage 4, some of them will actually sell a significant chunk of their business to make it small enough that they can go all the way back to stage 2 and they have the time of their life. They love it. So it's not about, are you wired to it, or is it like fatalistic, you could never grow? That's just patently false. It is, do you understand what has to change? And are you willing to make those changes? And again, when armed with that power, the vast majority of founders, I believe, I wouldn't go so far as to say every single one, but I'm yet to meet one who couldn't make that leap when they wanted to. And here's the problem with it. When we try and make that leap in stage 4, we've never actually figured out what a CEO needs to be. Which is what happens in stage 5. And because of that, we're kind of subject to luck again, just lucking into someone who can do that, which usually doesn't. Or we more often we try and get somebody from within our organization, our trusty right-hand man or woman who seems to be able to manage this better than we can. We put them in the CEO seat, and it's not a fit for them either. They're a great number 2, but they're not a great number 1. And so what happens when we try and exit in stage 4, we ultimately undermine our own personal growth. We also undermine our organization's ability to scale, right? And it doesn't mean that it can't. It just means that a lot more things have to go right for it to happen. And so my encouragement for folks, again, if their vision requires this company to scale, if it requires them to get to stage 5, then it's in their best interest to learn how to do that, to evolve, to make the changes, and then set about having someone else take the CEO seat once they've already built it. And that's what happens. We're skipping ahead a little bit, but that's what happens in stage 6. In stage 6, we decide to go from being CEO to being owner, right? Or in the nonprofit world, it's not quite owner, but mentor, advisor, whatever language you want to use for that. And if you can go from stage 5, being the true CEO, right, being chief executive, to true owner, the ability for the company to scale even faster when you're gone is much, much higher, right? And that's when it becomes, once you're in stage 5, that's when it's time to say, hey, am I the person to take us through the next iteration of scale? Not in stage 4.
Mm-hmm. So if people go through your book, will they discover a way or guidance towards the right hire to replace you or to take the owner's shoes?
Yes, absolutely. And it's a huge topic, and the book's not meant to solve every single problem, but it will show you where to start looking, right? And it'll show you the most common mistakes that we make almost universally in this. If you haven't done it before, if you've not looked at the patterns at any type of scale, the most intuitive way to do it is wrong. And most people, even big ones like Microsoft, got it wrong, right? Apple got it wrong the first time they tried to do it. And then Steve Jobs had to come back. Home Depot got it wrong, right? And had to bring their founder back in. So even big companies get it wrong. Doesn't mean that everyone has to get it wrong. It just means there's a very specific way to do it. And yes, we do detail that in the book in stage 5, when we're showing you how to move from being CEO, where you have to run your business or nonprofit, to being the true owner, where you can mentor someone else who does.
Mm-hmm. So it goes through a process of mentoring. You can't simply hire somebody from a completely different line of business or outside of your business directly.
Yeah. So I very rarely deal in absolutes, right? So it's all probabilities. The probability that you'll bring someone in, let's go back to stage 4. Haven't figured out the CEO thing, lots of challenges with the senior leadership team. The idea that you can go out and find someone who's going to save your company for you, it happens. It's asking a lot. It's asking an enormous amount of your ability to find the right person. It's asking an enormous amount of their ability to recognize what actually has to happen to achieve that. It can happen. But so for a commercial airline to go down, 5,000 things have to go wrong, right? To succeed by bringing someone else to be your CEO when you're in stage 4 and you haven't figured it out yourself, 5,000 things have to go right for the thing to work. So it's just an amount, like, what's the probability of success of that strategy? And that's what we're able to do using the Founder's Evolution, to say, hey, in each stages, what are the highest probability of success strategies? What are the essential strategies that if you do these in this stage, right, the right thing at the right time, that's going to create an inordinate amount of success. That's going to propel you to the next stage. That's going to give you the opportunities you're looking for.
Mm-hmm. So say you take the highest probability road and you decide to mentor somebody, but yet you don't want to mentor them according to your image and according to your way to manage a business, because you want to step away and maybe you're not willing, or maybe you don't have the skills. If you're not willing, you probably also don't have the skills to take the company to the next stage. So how is it then that you mentor somebody who's supposed to take the company to the next stage?
Yeah, it's a great thing. So one of my favorite mental models around this is to use the idea of a setting and a pearl, right? So let's say you have a beautiful necklace, and right in the middle of it is a big pearl. Well, that big pearl is the part of your company that should never change. That is the secret sauce that you brought to the table. It's the essence of the jewelry, right? That's what makes the company, or the nonprofit, the nonprofit. So what you want to do, you don't want to change that pearl, which means that you should be mentoring around what that pearl is. However, you don't want to mistake the pearl for the whole thing, right? The whole setting. So everything around the pearl can change, right? The entire setting can change. And those are the things that you don't want to be heavy-handed. Those are the places where you want to give freedom to the person who's replacing you to explore new and better ways and to grow it. And there's this kind of bittersweet thing. I remember the first few years after I stepped down as CEO at the company, and put some new leaders in place, they had turned it around, not turned around, but they were able to grow like 45 and 55% or something like that in the first couple of years after I left. And there's just like, oh man, like it was like, was I holding us back? And the reality of it is, no, I put the right leaders in at the right stage, right? And so they were able to build on the foundation that I laid, and I spent some time just being there as a mentor, particularly for the CEO, and just saying, here's how I think about this, here's what's important, here are the things that you need to run with, right? And so a big part of mentoring at this stage is also encouraging them in what you saw in them to put them in that place in that position in the first place. Samuel Johnson said, people need to be reminded more than they need to be instructed. And for folks that are owners that are mentoring their CEOs that have taken over after them, many times it's just about reminding them of who they are. It's reminding them about why you chose them to replace you, and just encouraging them and giving them that strength to continue. Many times that's most of what you need to do at that stage.
Mm-hmm. This is a bit going in the direction of mindset. So my next question is around the area of personal growth and success mindset. What role do these play in your success and in the success of the people that you have mentored?
Yeah. I would say, it's an enormous amount. So what happens that stops our growth is just because you succeed in one stage doesn't mean you have the skill set to succeed in the next, right? And when we don't recognize that the stage has changed, we don't recognize that our skills need to change and our strategy needs to change. And so the goal of the book is to take a lot of the guesswork out of what do I need to be working on? It doesn't mean you don't need to be working on something. It's quite the opposite, right? If you recognize, hey, I need to constantly be evolving as a founder, then you have that has to be your mindset. Your mindset has to be, yes, I've succeeded in the past, and to succeed now, I need to know what I need to do now, and that means some new skills that I have to train. So that requires a pretty significant degree of humility, right? When you're great at doing whatever you do, but not great at managing people who do it, that's a humbling experience, right? When you are great at being a leader and need to start to learn to let go of your kind of superstar decision-making skill and develop a team of people who make decisions, and you don't know how to do that, that's a humbling process. And the further you go, in the journey, the bigger the skill changes are, and the more comfortable it can be to not embrace that, right? The more you can kind of sip your own Kool-Aid and think, I've got this figured out. So to answer your question, it's a huge, huge piece. And it's so important that I felt the book was a necessary kind of companion to that, to say, and here's how you need to be doing that at each stage.
Yeah. So once again, where is the book to be found and downloaded from?
Yeah, so you can head to scalearchitects.com/founders. You can get a copy of the book there. You'll also find a quiz to find out what stage you're in. So if folks are listening like, hey, I don't really know which stage I'm in, I don't know what chapter to read, you can take the quiz. It's 10 questions, remarkably accurate, and you can jump straight to that chapter. So the cool thing about it, Zarina, and this is feedback that I've gotten from folks who have read and applied the book, when you understand what stage you're in, and the inside there's an essential strategy for each stage, the one thing or the one subset of things that you need to be working on. When you recognize what that is, not only is it, hey, this is what you need to do, it also tells you these are the 20 or 30 things you don't need to be doing anymore, or you don't need to be doing yet. And so average time saved from folks who've sat down and calculated it is about 10 hours a week in things that they didn't need to be doing anymore. I mean, which one of the folks listening today, if you were given an extra 10 hours in your week, couldn't figure out a new skill set to grow your business? Every one of you could, and it's possible once you know what you need to work on.
Yeah, fantastic. I am willing to go to the end with step 7, if you're also willing.
All right. Step 7. Step 7 is really genuinely remarkable. And so what happens as we go from stage 5, chief executive, to stage 6, true owner, our vision moves from what's going on inside the company to what's going on outside the company, right? But it's still primarily dominated by the company. When we move to stage 7, our vision isn't about the company anymore. It's about the industry. It's about the community. It's about the world around us. And what we do is we step into the 7 stages called the visionary founder stage. And I kind of liken it to be like being inducted to the Hall of Fame in a sport. It's where we move from whatever we need to do to be in the game to what we can do to reshape the game, right? And it's this opportunity to step out of that hero role into the guide role. You'll see a lot of folks will write a book during this season. They'll start speaking during this season. They'll start actively mentoring other folks in other industries or other companies, not just their own CEO. And it is by far and away the most rewarding of all 7 stages. And it's also the place where you have the maximum freedom. So really cool thing that happens is what are founders looking for all the way back in the beginning? They're looking for freedom. And we usually express that primarily in 2 ways. There's a couple others depending on the person. But the biggest ones are time freedom, and what you do with that time, and money freedom, right? You don't have to worry about your next dollar. And in stage 7, we have maximal time freedom and money freedom because we built a really successful business that runs itself. And we're able to use that to do just what brings us the most fulfillment. You don't have to worry about making money anymore. You don't have to worry about getting time freedom anymore. You get to use that money and time freedom to do what is most rewarding for you. And so stage 7 is about being a visionary founder. It's about reshaping the game, giving back, and paying it forward all at the same time. And again, it is the single most rewarding stage you can get to.
I don't know if you can answer this question, but I'm still going to ask it. What percentage of these 20,000 companies that you were involved with in an advisory role reached stage 7?
I wouldn't be able to tell you that statistically. I would have to go anecdotally, and I would say somewhere around 1% of 1%. It's a very, very small number. That's not all bad. Not everyone needs to do that, right? Not everyone has had the time to do that. Even though it's been almost 20 years now, this is a lifelong journey. Yeah. But I would say the ones that have had an outsized impact on the world around them. So it's very rare. Not everyone has to get there. You're not a bad person if you don't get there, right? But for those who do want to walk the journey all the way through, who do want to make that type of a lasting impact, there is no more lasting impact than what you can do in stage 7. There's this Greek proverb that I like to bring up when I'm teaching this, and it is that a society grows great when old men plant trees under whose shade they'll never sit. And we're building not just for us anymore. You have the freedom to not build for you, and building for others is the most beautiful thing that we can do.
Fantastic. Scott Ritzheimer of scalearchitects.com. Go check it out, download the book and also the quiz, the 10-question quiz. I had a blast. I really enjoyed your insights, and I followed through experientially in my mind as well. Thank you so much for explaining the steps so thoroughly, and also for the story. It's a good one.
Thanks for having me on, Serena. It was a real privilege.
For me as well. Thank you. Hi, I'm Zarina, and welcome to the GrowNLearn podcast. Beyond these conversations, I actively connect investors with high growth opportunities. Right now, I'm working on projects seeking strategic partners, like a $346 million real estate development, a revolutionary heating technology, and an AI-driven life insurance disruptor. If you're an investor, PE firm, or family office looking for scalable ventures, let's talk. Book a call at growandlearn.org to explore these opportunities.